So welcome to Johan Lundgren, Chief Executive, of course, at easyJet. Thank you for joining us here today, Johan. Really, really appreciate it. Just want to kick off really with easyJet holidays before we move on to the airline. But obviously, really exciting time for easyJet holidays in the midst of all of this uncertainty and this crazy, difficult time. You, of course, launched to the trade in August. So just talk to us a bit how it's been going, the level of interest from agents. I think you had a target of 3,000 agents that you want to reach. Talk to us about how that's going.
Yeah, so basically coming back to the original thinking about this was that we saw that there was a great opportunity for ourselves in this space because of the access to the airline that we had, and then also the network we had and the strength of the brand and so on. So of course, the whole situation about the pandemic has definitely had an impact on easyJet holidays plans as well. But I think it's important to remind ourselves that the opportunity we see there is probably on the relatively scale, and perhaps in a strange way, is even stronger before. We know, for instance, that when we are in a downturn, that people will still prioritize their holidays. And we know that people gravitate towards strong brands and trusted brands, which is really some of the core critical assets that this company has. So whilst we clearly been affected by this, we are pleased with what we have seen in terms of what it delivers. And just as an example, that when we had now Portugal being removed from the quarantine list here in the UK, we saw an amazing peak in sales there, which means that there is an underlying demand for a lot of these routes and these destinations where easyJet holidays are operating to. And also we're immensely proud that we've been able to join up with the trade as well. And you're right, 3,000 is the number that we've been aiming for and on our way to also achieve.
And what is the level of support that you're providing for agents? Do you have a kind of field-based sales team that are going out and visiting agents? I appreciate that's very difficult in the current climate, but talk to us about how you're strengthening your relationship with the trade.
Yeah, so that's something that Gary and the team was working on, and it's mostly done on an individual basis with the agreements that we have between the individual agents as such. Clearly, we want to build upon the fact that easyJet is very much from a buying point of view and from an engagement point of view, a digital proposition, but we definitely believe that the trade can play a part, which I'm sure they will do. And we're looking to do it and base it partly on what the needs is from the agencies, and partly also what we can set up and promote to them. But we're very, very excited about the opportunity. But I think it should be taken into the context that we are in this amazingly difficult and challenging times for ourselves. But the opportunity on holidays has, if anything, become even stronger. Because also, so if we remember that whilst this is a crisis for the UK, travel industry, this is also a lot of, difficult, moments and situations for hoteliers out in Europe. So they are very much in need for distribution and very much trying to find ways on how they can make their products and hotels accessible for products in the UK, but also in other places in Europe. And of course, with the size and the scale of easyJet, we represent a great opportunity for them to do so. So it works both ways.
Yeah.
Very difficult right now. That's very clear for the whole of the industry.
Yeah, and what a time really to launch, this whole venture. Really pushing it this year, right in the midst of this crisis. But you talked about the sort of scale and size of easyJet holidays. Of course, we had the gap left by Thomas Cook at the end of last year. So do you see, I appreciate it will take time, but where do you see easyJet holidays going? Do you want to be, is it going to be the big three that we're going to see, but is it more likely to be the big two? Are you trying to sort of edge in and take over one of the other leading package operators?
Yeah, we always said earlier that with the launch that we first of all wanted to do in the UK, that was important for ourselves to do so and establish the holidays as such. But we also wanted to move in and roll that out in through other European countries, because we basically wanted to have the network and the brand is very well known. But clearly, we want now to make sure that we can make a success out of this, as we are in this recovery that will be slow. And it will be painful and it will be uneven. and we're going to need, I think we're going to come on to that, we're going to need all the support we can get from the government in the UK to be able to provide that support. But the opportunity hasn't gone away, and I see, and you know, with the discussions that we're having with the board of easyJet Holidays and Gary, you know, that we will be a major player on a pan-European basis, not only in the UK. That was the ambition, and that is still the ambition with easyJet Holidays.
Wow, okay, so big ambitions. And in terms of how you kind of see it working, is it as a traditional package operator? Are we going to see reps and teams in resorts?
No, there's no reps on there. We're working with local companies that will provide service and support for the customers that we have in there. And it's really built upon the flexibility that we have on one hand with a tremendous network and the opportunities we have on the routes that we're operating on, not only flying 2-3 times you know, a week to some of these places, but 2, 3, 4 times per day to some of these destinations in a normal situation. So that's where the concept was built upon, that we could take flexibility on one hand that we've seen has been so much in demand from customers that, okay, I don't only want to go on a 1 week, perhaps I want to go on a 5 days, and I want to have a morning flight and I want to come back on an afternoon flight. So that flexibility is something that we can offer just by using the airline's network. And if you combine that then with making own arrangement from a contractual basis with some of the best hotels around the Mediterranean, and the scale we have that gives us also very competitive rates from that, you're getting flexibility and you're also getting fantastic prices in doing so. And that's why we think that this proposition is really unbeatable.
I mean, what split then? You've obviously talked about the airline, and it's an incredibly important part of this, but what split would you like to see between easyJet packaged bookings and easyJet flight only? You know, what proportion of seats do you hope to sort of reserve for packages? Do you have a kind of aim and target in mind on that?
No, I mean, this is one of the great part of this. This is, you know, very seamless and fluent. It's all depending on what the demand is there. And because of also the booking patterns are differently, it works very much in the company's favor, because we're seeing, and as you know, the booking, you know, from holidays, customers would come in earlier than you would normally see from business travelers, as an example. So we can see that we can let, you know, basically have easyJet Holidays selling unlimited amount of seats, what they would like to do as the early part of the programs are being launched. And then we can then see and make sure that the airline can then sell the other capacities that is then left, which you would normally do in any case. So one of the beauties about this model is that we don't need to set up that, okay, the holidays will have, you know, X% of the seats on that plane and Y% of the total capacity. That already is, you know, there, because it can access the whole of the 100 million seats that we would normally sell, you know, if it wasn't for this crisis. But the principle will remain the same as we go forward.
Okay, so no set target with that, more flexibility.
Well, we do have internal targets on what we should achieve in there, but yeah. I think from a capacity point of view, it's a very neat solution.
I mean, you've obviously mentioned this awful crisis, and what a time to launch. Like we said, that there's obviously been redundancies at easyJet Holidays and the airline, like there has every industry, every company within the industry. And of course, we've seen the airport base closures, the loss of pilot roles. Do you believe there should be more government support for the industry? And it sounds like from what you said earlier, you do. And just talk to us about that sort of things, and what would you like to see the government doing for the sector?
Well, a number of things. I've been frustrated for this for some period of time, as you know, and I think that if you take a step back as well, I mean, it's interesting. You know, UK has been has always been built on connectivity, on trade, on market-friendly operating. Connectivity has really been, you know, one of the core pillars of the success that, you know, the country has enjoyed. And I remember, you know, moving to the UK, this is over 10 years ago, that I wanted to come here because this was really the center of the aviation industry, the travel industry, the hospitality industry. This is where standards were set, procedures were designed, and development was done, and R&D and all of that. And I think that, you know, it's important to know that this is something that cannot be taken for granted because of the pressure that exists now. that is really not down to the fact that people don't want to travel. It's really the public policies that dictates what demand is going to be out there, because it affects the consumer confidence. And Portugal is a good example of that. When the quarantine is removed, sales go through the roof. So the underlying demand is there, but because of the public policies that are in place, that has a lot of flaws, by the way, in terms of the design of the quarantine, which we argued for a long time that it should be much more a targeted approach and not been done in that blanket fashion. We believe that needs to be developed, that needs to be refined, and that needs to be improved. We would also look for testing to come in place. And you cannot wait for the 100% perfect solution on this. You need to make sure that you can allow travel to take place and minimize the risk. Nobody in this industry, nobody wants to be part of and contribute to a second wave of the pandemic. And we've been working very closely with the EASA and the CAA and all the regulators around Europe to make sure that flying is safe. So we would want them to change the policies on the quarantine that is in place. We would want them to look forward to introduce testing where it makes sense, but we would also want them and to remove and give a temporary removal of the APD. APD is one of the highest taxes in the world. And I think to remove that on a year basis, as an example, to cover that off, would give a really incentive also for people to travel and connectivity to be there when it's so desperately needed for the country as part of the economic recovery. I think about that particularly also in the context of Brexit, that we hard to speak of, but we have left the union, and we got 31st of December coming our way in there, and in order to get increased connectivity, as that was one of the arguments originally also why the UK wanted to lead, to take control of decisions that was being made elsewhere. And then now those decisions needs to be taken in this country in order to make sure that this industry, is surviving this, but it's also intact to that way that the fabric of it is still there as it can participate into this recovery. We would also look at ATC charges to be removed for that period of time. We would look for the government to provide funds and resources for development of new technology from a sustainability point of view. Sustainability is going to be even more important as we go through the aftermath of this crisis. People will look for definitely more companies who are doing more in this area. And as you know, we are the first major area in the world who offsets all the carbon emission from the fuel we're doing. And because of the difficulties from an economical point of view, where profits will not be available to that extent within this industry, aircraft manufacturers, to promote this, government needs to step in and help and support that. So there's a huge range of things that the government needs to do. But if there was one thing, make sure that the improvement comes into play when you're looking at the design principle of the quarantine. Introduce the testing that is in there, remove the APD on a temporary basis to incentivize flying, and then also specific measures. I think that could be done throughout the various different components of the industry should be considered.
I mean, your point on APD is particularly interesting. I mean, if you've seen TTG's Safe Travel campaigns, that's exactly one of the things that we're asking for. Yeah, I
agree, and I think that's a great initiative, and this is something that I think that the government also needs to understand that time is running out.
Yeah,
you can't take it for granted that the industry will be. easyJet is fortunate to that extent that we came in this situation as one of the strongest airlines in Europe. And we've done a lot of things in terms of, raising cash and equity, but just keeping on borrowing money and laying on more debts is not a good mid to long-term solution either.
Yeah.
So we got to make sure that we come out of this, and we come out of this in a good shape so we can continue to invest into the future.
On this point on APD then, would easyJet commit to passing on the savings with APD to the customers so that we could get the industry going again? Because that's the challenge, isn't it? We have to make sure that airlines do pass on those savings so that we are getting consumers booking again and going on holiday again.
I think it would definitely be part of that, and a majority that would be passed on that. But also, you gotta think about this, Sophie. That this is a fight for survival for companies. And just because we've done a lot of things and we are, in better shape and relatively to others, there's no guarantee on what this, what the shape of the company will be going forward. The damage has been done. We've been grounded for 12 weeks, and now we started a very slow recovery of flying, and we are now heading into a winter season that is in even a normal year is loss making. So it's going to be a very long and hard and difficult winter. And I know many other companies in this industry where they also are living on the brink because the damage has been done. And I think one of the things in the message to the government, and I'm engaged in this as often as I can, many times a week with different levels of the government, is to say you can't wait to be kind of a somebody where you can come in as a last resort, because by that time it will be too late.
Yeah. And we've seen that with the collapse of several companies, Shearings, SDA Travel, of course, more recently, Flybe out of this pandemic.
Absolutely. And you don't need to go long way back if you're looking at Thomas Cook or Monarch as an example, that just because you were in a shape at a certain point in time, if you're taking on debt that makes really the company unmanageable, because everything you need to do is there to service the cost of those debts, that's not the solution. And that's why I think that this is a whole industry issue and a problem where I unfortunately think that the government is taking a lot of this thing for granted. It will be okay, but there is no guarantee it will be okay in the way we know it. And we already, to your point, seen the casualties along the way. Never mind also the absolutely fantastic people that has been forced to leave the industry by no fault of their own, because of the restrictions and the public policy that is being in play. Now, we completely get, and you would agree, and everybody would agree that the public policy is based on the concern about the welfare of people. We get that, we understand that, but it's the design of those policies and the measures that are being introduced that is simply flawed. And that's why we need to raise
on airport testing. Then, are you having conversations with government? I mean, I know we've got this scheme that Heathrow is rolling out, and the hope is that government are going to approve it. And perhaps by the time this interview airs, there will have been an announcement. I know we've got ATMPs that are pushing for this. Are you're having conversations on airport testing? Then, is easyJet involved with those conversations?
Yeah, we are for airport testing. We think that is one, absolutely something that should be introduced. Now, remember this though, that the testing at the airport should not be a substitute from fixing a policy that's flawed when it comes to the quarantine.
Right.
That need to be taken into consideration first and foremost. But then I think you will also see that when it comes to the airport testing, that you got to realize that you can't wait for that 100% perfect solution. I think that the cost that is currently attached to a test, which is 100, 120, 130 pounds per test, is going to be prohibited to really have an effect. There are some questions about the efficiency and the accuracy of the test, but I think that from what I know and what we follow is that there's quite a big development on this. That I've been hearing about the tests this morning that would cost around $10 as an example, that could give you a result within 90 minutes with an accuracy level about 95-96%. So when getting into those type of products and the testing, that's where I think this is really becoming attractive. And we need to do a number of things in order to get this done. There needs to be fixing the quarantine issue, and absolutely testing should be introduced.
And when you say fixing the quarantine issue, you're asking for more localized quarantines, the same way that we do in the UK. Yes. You're asking for that abroad as well.
Yeah, we're asking for a localized, target, risk-based approach on the quarantine, knowing what is the basis on why the quarantine is introduced, based on what data, based on what fact. Because here's the issue. Unless it's a transparent way on why it's been introduced, how can you remove it? And we don't have any heads up on this, and the government doesn't provide a heads up to the industry on these things. which is unfortunate, I believe. And that just comes back to my previous criticism about the principle about this quarantine, that if you don't disclose to people and companies under what basis it is introduced, what are the data you're looking at, and in what areas and regions are you looking at those, how do you then know when you can remove that? If that is something that you're just sitting with yourself as an information, it becomes almost unmanageable as a company within this industry to live with that. So that's what we need to do, and we know that they are looking at it, but time is running out on these things.
Yeah, and really important actually that you're making that point, and good to hear that you're pushing ministers to understand this. It would be remiss of me not to talk about the refunds crisis. Of course, this has been a difficult time for all industries, and as you flagged, the airline sector as well has been under incredible pressure. But talk to us about the refunds crisis, because easyJet, like many other companies, has obviously faced consumer frustration, anger. Talk to us about how you're kind of winning consumers back, you're getting that consumer trust back, because on the flip side, we've also got this frustration issue that the FCO is now issuing its blanket quarantine, the DFT is issuing its blanket quarantines, but some airlines, including I think easyJet, are still flying to certain destinations and then not necessarily issuing refunds because those flights are still continuing. So talk to us about that.
Well, we look at this from the fact that, where there is a demand, and there still is demand to certain of these destinations, we will make sure and accommodate that we can fly that, because it comes back also to the fact that if people wants to go there, and also taking the paying the price in terms of going into the quarantine, well then that's fine. That's okay with ourselves, as long as we can protect our people in order to do that. But the issue on the refunds is a really important one. First of all, I mean, there's no doubt that there hasn't been a company who's lived up to the normal standards of service, that you would expect, and that includes us at easyJet as well. So there's not anything to say in terms of arguing about that, and it's deeply frustrating to have to deal with. What you should bear in mind, though, and just to give you a little bit of a context on that, and in our Q3 that we had over 250,000 cancellations. Last Q3 we had about 2,500. There is no organization, no company that would be set up to deal with the request and the demands and the pressure that comes with having to deal with that type of situation. No one. Now, if you go outside the UK, there's been agreement with the governments and the industry that refunds doesn't need to be paid, that voucher solution is what the customers can expect. And unless you use that voucher within 12 months, you will get on to do cash. Now, we've been struggling to cope with the sheer amount of pressure. And this happened at the same time, Sophie, as the contact centers were also in lockdown and people had to go home.
Yeah, sure.
It's impossible to live up to that standard. So while we've been taking a lot of criticism ourselves and other competitors in this market, we've been receiving praise in other countries because we're one of the only airlines who actually are paying refunds. Wow. Now, this is a tricky one to deal with, because this is something the UK decided on very early on, that the refunds and the policy about the 7 days was still going to be there. So that's something that we have to accept and live with. Now we got it down to below 30 days. We are paying refunds, and we are paying more than others, but it doesn't matter. As soon as we have an individual customer where we're not meeting up to the expectations of him or her, it is a failure. Now, in terms of how you build back the trust on that, I think it's encouraging to see, though, that for people who fly with us, the customer satisfaction score is almost at an all-time high. We put it in the context. We are, regarding half a percentage points in move in terms of, how people rate their experience from satisfaction from a scale of 1 to 5 as a big number. In terms of percentage-wise, from the scale that we have, we're up 13% versus last year. This is one of almost close to all-time high from a customer experience from people who fly with us. So, question: how do you build back that trust from people who has only been experiencing that the contact has been with the airline has been about shifting programs, canceling programs, and not being able to deliver the refunds on time? Of course, that's not a great proposition.
Yeah.
But when you taking them back on the flight again, it's actually one of the better experiences that they ever have had before. So that's one way of doing it. Now,
Getting the
this
book, isn't it? It's getting them back on that flight.
it is. But you know how these things work. Once you get momentum, and once people are looking at other people who are flying, they're going on the holiday, they're doing what to do, more people will do so. But it all boils down to the confidence that is a result of the public policy that comes with the quarantines, as an example.
Sure, and that's the challenge. And my next question is going to be, you've obviously had to make these horrific redundancies like many other companies have, but as that consumer demand comes back, and touching wood, it comes back more quickly than people are hoping, what happens then? Would you be staffing up? Do you envisage having to have pilots and cabin crew on 0 hours contracts to sort of sustain the flights that you're going to need to put on quickly? What happens with that?
Well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that nobody knows exactly when the demand is going to come back. If you're looking at our view has been, we believe it's going to be in 23 before you're going to see the demand returning to 2019 levels. I think IATA now pushed it out to 2024 as an example. There are one or two companies who believe perhaps will come back earlier, but nobody really knows. So I think what we do know, though, is that the recovery will be rocky. It will be uneven, because these measures will be turned on and off. So that means that because you have that uncertainty, the responsibility when you don't know when it's going to come back is to brace yourself for really, really difficult time. That's why we've been so onto and aggressive when it comes to getting as much cash available for ourselves, so we can survive through this extended period of difficult times as they come. That's why we're asking for the government for the support that is in there, and then also painfully having to right size the organization to a significant reduced level of demand. We have said publicly that we're going to be at the lower end of the fleet that we can be for next year, about 300 aircraft, which is over 50% less aircraft than we anticipated to have earlier on. Who knows if that's the right number? It might be less. And if it's less, then we're having more difficult decision to face. It might be more, because we might see that people have been staying home to larger extent this year and perhaps doing staycations, and therefore they're definitely going to go on their holiday next summer. And then there will not be any shortage of and difficulty, I believe, to get people to come back. But we have been trying to be in our discussions with the individuals who has been unfortunate that they've been impacted by this and leave the organization, to make sure that it is that we can recruit people back. We want them back with us. We one of the strengths of this company, that is so dominant feature is the people. So extraordinarily painful when you have to let go of people that by no fault of their own will need to accept this change. But as soon as we can get people to come back because we see demand is there, we will of course do so.
And would that mean having pilots on 0 hour contracts and things just to make sure that you could have the demand, or are you just waiting to see what happens with that?
It depends. It's to your point. You don't know that. We have focused on really right sizing the organization. We haven't touched and made a big thing out of changes the terms and the conditions that is in the contract. But who knows? If this goes on for a longer period of time, and we're seeing all other and competitors are doing things that makes us in that case look uncompetitive, we can't rule out any things that we need to do. But at the moment, this is what we have done, and we hope that this is going to be enough.
And what is 2021 looking like in terms of bookings and appetite? We're hearing from travel agents that there isn't an appetite there. You said it, people don't want to give up their holidays. And I think there is a lot of hope being pinned on 2021. Presumably it's still looking a lot slower than it would have done this time last year for 2020. But is there, are you seeing that appetite and that demand for people to get away?
Well, we haven't provided any guidance really at all from a demand point of view into 2021, and that tells you something about the level of uncertainty that exists. We were just about to finish our financial year here, not in too long time as well. And normally we would give and provide guidance also for the coming winter, but we can't do that. It's impossible to say. We did say that we were going to fly about 30% of the planned capacity for Q4. We upped that to 40%. But beyond that, we can't give any guidance on what we think that this will be going forward for the winter. I think that there's anecdotal evidence and signals for next summer that there definitely is an interest in there. I've been talking to some hoteliers in there who believe that they have, if they compare to last year, very good and strong, solid bookings on a year basis. But this is still, so this is very, very early on. So this is still a lot of uncertainty out there. And I don't think this is one of the problems, of course, and your reviewers would know this inside out, that when you have a company, you can't plan for your more optimistic scenarios. You can't plan for your hope and build your plan on survival based on something that perhaps is a little bit more on the optimistic side. You need to be sure that because if you get it that wrong, it's over. You're out. So you need to be planning very prudently and take very difficult decisions, in an early stage in the process, and that is painful. That is very painful. But if the outcome is that you are wrong from that perspective and the bank comes back earlier, well, then it's a great problem to have.
Yeah.
I'd rather be in that situation, and that's what we're hoping to do. But it's going to be it's going to be a tough winter before we see what's going to happen for next summer.
And that brings us back to that urgency for the government to understand that, we've got to get consumer confidence back and get them listening to the industry. And just talk to us about your conversations with them. Do you get the sense that government is starting to listen? Because I know there's many in the industry who think that the government just aren't prioritising outbound travel. They don't see any point in it, and they see it as sort of taking money out of the country. Do you get this? Is that a fair, perhaps a summary of the government, or do you get the sense that they are starting to understand now the challenges and complexities of the industry?
I do think that they understand the issues. I do think that they understand the messages. I've been seeing some commentators say, well, we're not clear enough for what we want. I don't think it's about that. I think that they know what it is that is needed in order to do that. I think that they are struggling between different priorities. I think that they are perhaps not fully aligned about the scale of the problem and the time it will take before it really materializes. And like I said, the damage has already happened, and I don't believe in the view that they have about that companies would turn to them as a last resort, because by that time it is too late. It's game over. But I do think that they understand that. But I do think that they also are having difficult decisions to take, because they are thinking about what are the priorities, what does it mean from a public health point of view. I mean, that's one thing, but also, how are we then going to defend those actions versus other industries? How are we going to defend that to some companies, but not to other companies? But I think that you can debate that and have all arguments about that back and forth. And but in the meantime, unless you do something, you're going to end up in a very, very bad place. And if you're looking at, coming back to what I mentioned earlier about the history of the UK and how good it's been and how efficient it's been and how supportive the government has been into making sure that this industry has been one of the primary industries, in the world of aviation and travel hospitality. That's what I think is at risk. I don't think that you can rely on the fabric and the texture of this industry to be around. And that damage has already started to happen.
And we often see this as a result, it's the recession that we saw greater consolidation in the sector. Do you foresee, more consolidation happening within the aviation sector?
Yes, yes and no. I think on one hand, your normal response would be yes. But then again, you would have seen also that, some of the weaker carriers has already left the field. And now we're seeing, if anything, market distortion that, some European governments are, pouring billions and billions into Europe's most inefficient airlines. It distorts the competition. And this is another call I have to the government. They should be proud of the aviation industry. They should go out and say, look, we are going to support this industry. this is a backbone of connectivity that we're going to need, and we're going to make sure that not only do they survive this, but they come through this in a way where they haven't got relatively weaker compared to others. Looking at the billions that's being given in loans and equity into Air France, KLM, and Alitalia, and SAS, and Lufthansa, it's not even comparable to the support that's been accessible. For instance, for easyJet, we got the CCFF scheme, 600 million, but that was something that was given to companies that had a certain credit rating from from an investment point of view. So that was not specific for the industry as such. We had the furlough schemes that's been very helpful, but that is also something that other countries are doing, and they're doing for a longer period of time. So
people to keep working, because we've obviously got the frustration here that some people are on furlough, but they're not allowed to work. So then that doesn't help the travel industry trying to process all of these refunds. And
the key point isn't here about whether we should debate, should we have an extended period of furlough for people in the industry. The key thing must be to incentivize and let demand be there. You can have that done in a safe way from a public welfare point of view, with the things that I talked about earlier. A refined and improved principle around the quarantine system, a targeted approach, testing being introduced as well. That's what we need. That's what we're looking for.
And lastly, Johan, you touched on it earlier, but sustainability is obviously a huge passion of yours, and we've seen easyJet talking a lot about it. As we look forward, and there's been a lot of talk during this crisis, there were fewer planes in the sky. There are lots of people talking about sustainability and the importance of that. Will it remain just as high on the government's agenda, on aviation's agenda? Because right now, obviously, companies are struggling to survive and may not be necessarily prioritizing issues like sustainability. Tell us, is it still a passion of easyJet? Is it something that you're still committed to pushing for? And talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes, we've taken the decision as we've been going through everything in the company, or what we should stop doing and what we should continue to doing. And as you would imagine, there's been a lot of things that we've been, forced to put a halt on, to delay, and even say we're not going to go into that project again at all. But we made, very early on, and we are absolutely committed to that we're going to continue with the offsetting program that we have. We know that this is not a perfect solution, but it's more than any other airline in the world is doing today. These offsetting programs, they work with the quality of the projects that we're doing. And we know also from surveys that we've been doing that customers will be, this will become even more important post the pandemic in the recovery. And I think that you will see governments paying more attention to that. But now they need to provide the incentives and the funds and the resources, and not the penalties, in order to make sure that we now can fast track ourselves to making, flying, having less impact on the environment. The key thing in here is not to make people fly less, but to make sure the flying has less impact on the environment. That's where the debate should be. That's where the focus should be. That's, how the government can help and support that. Because, I'd be quite upset and I'm quite irritated when I hear people talk about, the impact that aviation has on the environment. We should fly less. Well, you see now, when we can't fly, you see the consequences from an economic point of view. You see the impact this has on livelihoods. And to just say, well, let's just increase taxes and make it more, inaccessible for people, and therefore trying to reduce the demand. Well, guess what? Wealthy, rich, privileged people will continue to pay those taxes and pay even more, and they will fly. Load factors will go down, and you will make that holiday week that's been so important for hardworking families, and the accessibility that easyJet has as one of those carriers since the deregulation been able to offer will go away. That is a horrible elitistic thought and idea. So we got to make sure that the flying will remain accessible for the millions of people, but make sure that there's incentive and funds and technology that will have less impact on the environment as we continue to grow, because that's all we need to do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Johan. I know I've probably stolen more time than I was supposed to, but thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.